I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews, where we scrutinize the deeper meanings of vampires. For science or art, same difference? Do you recall when we discussed Nosferatu? Yes. It was just 1 year ago when I explained to you the intricacies and depths of film's very first vampire. The vampire who made cinematic history. We delved into how German director F.W. Murnau filmed his scandalous 1922 rendition of Dracula in the expressionistic style as a reflection of his country's trauma following World War I. It was produced in an era fascinated with occultism, when film was a brand new, mysterious, and strangely scientific art form that many people were convinced might even be sorcery or black magic. And 1920s audiences were so unnerved by the horrifying images and especially the appearance and performance of the actor playing the vampire, Count Orlok, Max Schreck, whose very name means terror, that rumors and urban legends abounded. No mere man could have embodied such a ghastly creature. No, the man must not be a man at all, but secretly, truly, a monster of the occult and supernatural. This is not true, of course, in case you were wondering. No, the only magic in filmmaking is metaphor. There's plenty of documented evidence that Max Schreck was just a talented, really tall actor who portrayed all kinds of characters on stage and screen. But 80 years later, scriptwriter Stephen Katz was like, but what if the rumors were true? And Max Schreck really was a vampire. Oh man, how awesome would that be? What would the filming of Nosferatu have been like? And he penned a screenplay. And then Nicolas Cage got a hold of the script, and he was like, wow, we need a super artsy, poetic, experimental director to make this movie for my brand new production company. And everyone was like, no, Nicolas Cage, you're a producer now. Producers don't like artsy. Artsy is like for indie movies, not Hollywood. But Nicolas Cage was like, no man, I'm Nicolas Cage. I do what I want. So he brought on E. Elias Marriage, a relative unknown with only one artsy indie feature film on his directorial resume, along with a couple Marilyn Manson music videos. He took the script and was like, this is good and weird, but I bet I can make it weirder. And Nicolas Cage was like, I like weird. And thus was spawned the 2000 film Shadow of the Vampire, starring John Malkovich doing his Malkovichiest as the 1920s German director F.W. Murnau.
But such is the price of genius. Thank God an end to this artifice!
The movie takes a lot of liberties with Murnau's character. Yes, the primary premise is what if Max Schreck was really a vampire, but it changes Murnau even more. Now, instead of being an artistic, sensitive soul who wants to create an effigy of the plague of war that destroyed Germany and brought about such a loss of faith and dignity and cultural identity, he is portrayed as a sociopathic tyrant, obsessed with the legacy of his art. Oh, sorry, his science.
We are scientists engaged in the creation of memory. But our memory will neither blur nor fade.
The vampire Max Schreck is played by Willem Dafoe. Brilliantly. He was nominated for an Oscar for this role. And do you know how often vampires get nominated for Academy Awards? The answer is once. This one time. The only two other vampire movies ever nominated weren't for the actors playing the vampires, just technical awards and score. So yes, this is the most Academy-acclaimed vampire we have ever gotten. for whatever that's worth. In the original Nosferatu, Shrek's Dracula knockoff, Count Orlok, was threatening to audiences. Not just because he was hideous to look at with his bald head and rat-like features and claws, but also his looming presence. He was shot from below, making him seem even bigger and more menacing than Shrek's 6'3" frame. He moved slowly, with an unstoppable certainty, and those haunting eyes. We only see him blink once in the entire movie. Enough to give any proper jazz-age fellow the heebie-jeebies. That's how they talked in the 20s. But Willem Dafoe makes the vampire repulsive in a different way for a 2000s audience. His Shrek is creepy in a lecherous way, and plays up the scuttling, shrinking, rat-like qualities to make your skin crawl. And yet, he is also sympathetic. The film explores the solitude and isolation of being an eternally aging immortal, growing more decrepit and disgusting with the centuries, mired in a repulsive existence. Comparing him to Greek mythology's Tithonus, he monologues about how sad reading Dracula made him because he empathizes with the vampire in the book, who was once a mighty warlord and now has to perform the degrading duties of a servant when Jonathan Harker comes to his castle because he is so alone.
Can he even remember how to buy bread, how to select cheese and wine? He remembers his past glory, his armies, his retainers, and what he is reduced to.
But this vampire is not a would-be conqueror.
What is it that inspires the most longing in you, that is most desirable and yet most unattainable?
Delight or the sun.
And when he gets a chance to finally see sunlight on film later, it is a moment filled with pathos. And he's also funny. With such an absurd premise as, what if this human were actually a vampire pretending to be human, pretending to be a vampire, pretending to be such a seriously dedicated method actor that he makes Jared Leto look tame? The film would not have worked if it took itself too seriously. It embraces the absurdity, playing it straight for a twisted, dark sense of humor as Shrek starts eating the film crew one by one, much to Murnau's Malkovich-y dismay.
Why him, you monster? Why not the script girl?
The script girl. I'll eat her later.
And this humor provides a comforting bridge for the audience to digest the more profound concepts in the film. Because you see, even though Shrek here is a blood-drinking immortal creature of the night, it is the filmmaking process, film as an art form itself, that is the real vampire.
Why would you possibly want to act in a play when you can act in a film?
A theatrical audience gives me life, while this thing merely takes it from me.
Unlike live theater, which exists only in the moment, a film is functionally immortal from the instant it's captured. But it is also dead once you watch it. You are only ever viewing images of the past. And the time you spend watching it is hours of your life you're giving to the filmmakers, allowing them to suck away. And the longer a film endures, the more it takes on new life with every new generation that watches it. What better filmmaking experience to illustrate this vampiricness than one of cinema's very first movies that has endured now for almost a century, and also happens to be a vampire film.
If it's not in frame, it doesn't exist.
Elias Marriage was fascinated with this film is the real vampire concept and worked it into Shadow of the Vampire, even though it wasn't originally part of the script. The camera drains its subjects of flesh and blood, he says, and reduces them to these silent black and white shadows that only exist as living entities when the human eye gazes upon them. He sees the film as a great destroyer, the motion picture camera and the image as kind of a gorgon or Medusa that kills those who look at it or those who are looked at by it. He makes sure to include plenty of menacing shots of the camera itself, framing it like a monster. This is actually F.W. Murnau's original camera he used for Nosferatu, which they borrowed from a museum for this movie. Marriage also plays up this monstrousness with the editing effects, having the movie's image fade gradually from color to black and white and back again as the story dips in and out of the moments of filmmaking. Being drained of life's colors, like a vampire. This was one of his experimental techniques that Nicolas Cage loves so much. The movie's original title was Burned to Light, which is a reference to the film development process, and also how the vampire dies at the end. The special effects of his death scene are even shown as a film strip literally burning. One of the only ways that film can be truly destroyed and no longer immortal, if it's like the only copy. But then they changed the title of the movie to Shadow of the Vampire, to both play on the famous expressionist shadows of the original Nosferatu film, as well as on Marriage's idea of all images in film being but shadows of life. And once they're captured, those shadows then become eternal phantoms, wandering the earth forever, while all life fades and decays beyond it. Unless, of course, all copies of a film are in fact burned up by literal fire, which almost happened to Nosferatu. Because it was made against the wishes of Bram Stoker's estate, it lost the lawsuit, and Stoker's widow ordered every single copy destroyed. For decades, the film was thought to have suffered the true death, the final death. But then, like Dracula so often does, it was resurrected when a stray copy was found, and by then it had fallen into the public domain and was copied countless times. And then, once the internet came into existence, like all things, it gained true Nosferatu can never die now. Maybe the internet is the real vampire of our era.
A theatrical audience gives me life, while this thing merely takes it from me.
At the end of the film, she literally dies. The vampiric filmmaking process isn't just stealing her soul in a superstitious sense. In his ruthless obsession to create an immortal cinematic legacy, this fictitious Murnau has promised Shrek that he can kill this actress character on camera when they film the movie's ending.
You and I are not so different.
Murnau is presented as just as monstrous and vampiric as the literal vampire. As an auteur, he is ruthless and dictatorial with his cast and crew. His passion verges on mania, and is more horrific than the movie he's making. He casts a real vampire in his film despite the danger because he is a perfectionist, possessed by the desire to create perfect authenticity on film.
Doctor, these people cannot act. They don't need to act. They need to be.
Marriage really wanted to work with the 1920s Germany's popular interest in Nietzsche's idea of the death of God. People of the time thought of themselves as the new gods, the world makers, and the concept of a film director as a kind of god or getting god complexes has always been prevalent in the industry, especially back when film was a brand new art form. These directors were the ones constructing dreams of the future, the worlds that future generations would discover and inhabit. But this Murnau is no benevolent god. He demands blood sacrifices.
My people have to trust me for you to get what you want.
Like a vampire, he is manipulative, seductive, playing on their trust to lure them into a false sense of comfort so he can use them for his own ends.
Ellen is a woman who discovers the ultimate expression of love in the most exquisite pain imaginable.
The Ellen character this actress character is playing sacrifices herself to the vampire to save her town from his plague. And, like a greedy god, this Murnau demands this poor woman's real life be given for his creation. He thinks himself a genius, changing the world.
Consider it a sacrifice for your heart. Consider it a sacrifice for your heart.
No sacrifice is too great. But it's not himself he's sacrificing, it's his cast and crew, and he is too egomaniacal to see the difference. Though I suppose you could say he's sacrificing his soul, his humanity, his sense of goodness, if ever he had one, by sinking to such evil depths as this. Like a vampire who must become damned to live forever, so too is this Murnau in order to make his film. His lack of empathy actually makes him the worse of the two monsters.
Don't pretend you mourn, Herr Doctor. I know you.
You know you're bad when even the literal vampire has more emotional intelligence than you. Both of them are plagued by a profound loneliness. At the end of the film, Murnau is literally alone as everyone else in the room has been slaughtered, and he loses touch with reality, speaking to dead actors and crew as if they could still perform. Marriage says he wanted to have Murnau retreat into the reptilian core of his own brain for this moment, as an expression for how art at the beginning of the 20th century was so intoxicating and filled with madness, while there was still so much invention taking place. Invention was married to madness, he says, and cinema grew like a tumor or an added organ onto the side of the 20th century's brain. Invasive and parasitic, like a vampire. The taste and promise of immortality is enough to intoxicate this Murnau into sacrificing his humanity to make his film. This intoxication is addictive for him, and the movie also ties this into literal intoxication. There are several scenes where we see characters using drugs in ways that make them lose touch with reality.
What is it?
It's laudanum, that's what it is.
What's happened, Greta? Please.
It's morphine.
Morphine?
They even drug the cat in the opening scene to get it to be docile on the film set. We've discussed the vampire as an addiction metaphor before, but in this case, the drug use isn't so much a destructive force as a form of escapism. This also parallels the escapism of going to the movies, especially movies made by the 1920s German expressionists whose art was an effort to escape the trauma inflicted by World War I. In the climax, the men forcibly drug the actress character to get her to be docile while the vampire kills her on camera.
All you have to do is, as they say, relax, and the vampire will do all the work.
And let me tell you, in the era of Me Too, it's even more disturbing to see how the very few women in the industry this film presents are used and abused. How long they've been sacrificed and preyed upon by vampiric directors with god complexes. The camera lingers extensively on Shrek groping the poor drugged woman's breast while he sucks her life away, all for Murnau's pretentious art project.
It is necessary for the final frame to remind us of the inadequacy of our plans, our contingencies, every missed train, the failed picnics, every lie to a child.
Ugh, get over yourself. By all accounts, the real F.W. Murnau was nothing like this, but far too many other real-life directors are. And in the end, who does their art even belong to?
I will finish my picture! This is hardly your picture any longer. Yeah.
Imagine what this fictional Murnau's reaction would have been when the Bram Stoker estate ordered all copies of Nosferatu be destroyed. When he learned he might fail at immortality despite all his sacrifices. But Nosferatu didn't belong to the Stoker estate any more than it belonged to him in the end. It belonged to the world, which would not let it die. And in the past century, it has cast its shadow, long and looming, over all vampire cinema that's come since. The true shadow of the vampire is Nosferatu's influence on vampires in media and pop culture, as well as on the art form of film itself. Or maybe the shadow is just all that eyeshadow silent film actors wore.
Did you put on this makeup with a broom?
I am the Maven of the Eventide, and I directed this video you are watching. I am its god, so I'm a vampire now too. I am become immortal on the internet. You're watching this video, but this isn't me anymore. This version of me is dead. The life has been sucked from it by my camera's Gorgon eye. And now it's sucking your life away too while you're watching it. Got you. Are you still watching? Your life is delicious. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who supports these videos on Patreon. If you would like to help me make more vampire reviews, please join us on Patreon. Think of your contribution as buying into a slice of immortality for yourself. Wait, is that how directors seduce, like, film investors? I have become a monster!